We have Tom West with us, back again for the third time since if talking to our user group. First time was the SPL rehab
Yep.
dashboard back when we were still meeting in person, and Tom was remote, and that worked out rather well. And then more recently, the virtual race to .conf 20 was part of that team, which was a great globally distributed team. So when somebody had an issue, somebody else could jump in. I love that.
Yep. Absolutely.
And now we're going to learn about dashboard tricks. So take it away, Tom.
Hey everyone. Thank you very much for giving up your lunchtime to like attend my talk today. So and thank you very much again for having me. As Eugene went and said, this is the third time that I've been with you, and I really enjoy it every single time. Now, you may have, if you were part of the user group last time, where I gave the talk for the virtual racer.conf, you may have noticed some of the dashboards that we put together, and certainly that they didn't look anything like a normal dashboard, even though they were just simple XML. So we've put this presentation together to kind of give you an idea of how we did some of those things and how you could do them too, and not just with the virtual racer.conf and stuff that we did there, but also just general things that I've done along the way. So I've been involved in some massive projects to dashboard a lot of data, dashboards aimed at senior leaders for businesses, all the way through to publicly facing dashboards for the general public, to my own weird and wacky dashboards that have either some use or no use at all, but they look fun. So thought I'd kind of take a lot of those techniques that I've kind of learned and put together and put them towards a presentation. Now, you may or may not be pleased to know I am not going to do any PowerPoint presentations whatsoever. So just first of all, check in that you can see my screen.
Yep.
And excellent. Right. Okay. Yeah. So a little bit of background before we get started. A lot of the data I'm going to show today is through my smart home. I use have started recently to use something called Home Assistant, and it sends out a lot of data, which makes dashboarding, demonstrating tricks and things quite easy. And it helps to give you a bit of context of what I'm showing, because that will make it easy for you to understand some of the things that are going to be on screen as well, rather than it just be some line on a chart. Hopefully you'll get an idea as to exactly what we're trying to show. And so if I open up the presentation, and we've got a few different topics that I want to go over. Some of these have got kind of more than one thing. If you do have any questions at any point, feel free to just kind of jump in and ask the question. I'm not someone that's going to want to just wait until the end and answer all the questions there. Feel free to ask away whenever you think of anything you do want to ask. So we're going to start off pretty basic. If you are if you haven't really done much dashboarding in the past, then we're going to cover tokens, what they are, why you want to use them, and just some examples, some quite quick tips to make dashboards look a lot better just using them. Then we're going into something called hidden text inputs, moving over to a little bit of CSS and showing exactly why that's quite useful. Segueing off track a little bit onto reports and embedded searches, and a neat trick with there. Usually that's tied with when someone comes up and says, can you make this dashboard publicly available? The answer is no, but we can do this instead. And then wrapping this all up is a little bit of version control, and what you can do within your own Splunk environment to implement some sort of version control. And this doesn't have to be for dashboards, this could be for anything, which is quite cool. So if we start off with tokens first, and a lot of you may be familiar with this kind of layout right here, where you have an input, and then you've got the red exclamation mark and search is awaiting input, which can be it's a very quick way to put a dashboard together with an input, but usually it's not the look that you would like anyone to see, certainly when they're using it. But typically you will get this whenever you have a search which is referencing the value within your input. So in this case, we've got a drop down. It really doesn't matter whether I hit yes or no. Select one of those values and it will go and change that. So it runs a search and says, hi there. And a little bit of a better way to do this is to use a token and have that token use something called the depends flag within the XML. And you do have to dive into the XML for this, and you can hide the search. So this is exactly the same block as before, but this time we're not seeing that exclamation mark. That block's been hidden. Again, if we select yes or no, it will run the search, get hi there again. And as you start to get more used to this, actually there's other things that you can do as well. So as well as the depends flag that I just mentioned, there's also the rejects flag. So we can have states visible based on whether something exists or whether something doesn't exist. So again, it's the same block as before, but this time we've got a rejects block, which is saying please select an option. I select yes or no, that vanishes and it comes back again. And to show you just how easy, how simple this really is, we can show the XML for the dashboard. So right from the top, we've got the first row, which is this one here, and we've got our input.
Sorry, jump in, Tom.
Yeah.
Can you zoom in just a little bit? I think this is going to be, especially on the recording. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
I always forget that bit. Thank you. So yeah, we've got our first row here. Another neat thing as well, that a lot of people don't know, is that you can actually put inputs into panels. So rather than the input being right at the top, you can have it in the panel. Is kind of a good, it can easily be overused and can have issues with your layouts because there's a background associated with that, which you can override with CSS, but that's not usually the easiest thing to do. But you can certainly add inputs into panels rather than it being at the top. If they're dependent, you want to show them some of the time, then it's kind of a good thing because you're not left with a blank gap at the top. But we've got our input, which is absolutely nothing fancy, just a drop down. The token is the value of the input, a couple of choices, and that's it. And we've got our table, and you can see in our search, we're referencing our input here, select view of one, message of hi there, and we're just removing the underscore time field from that, and that's it. When I select on it with a bit of drill down, it then just sets the token of show to row. Done very well with naming conventions here, capital letters, underscores. But if we go to the next one that I showed, where we have that, where we had it hidden, I was mentioned about the depends flag. We've got that right here, where we can see depends equals, and then the show to results. So this is based on this search. So again, it's the same search. The only difference is the token. You can see select view one here, select view two, and that is mapped to this input. Because we hadn't selected anything, this token is not set, it is unset, it doesn't exist as far as the search goes, so the search is sat at awaiting input. Because it's sat at awaiting input, we don't have a state of done, therefore this token of show to results has not been set. And because of that, we've got our depends flag proving false because that token does not exist, which is why we just had that single row with just a single input showing that. And then we can go even further and we can see this time, once we selected the row, so it set this field, this token here of show three row, which is there. And everything else is exactly the same, except we've also now got this rejects flag underneath with a HTML block, and that is show three results. So exactly the same logic as before, except this time we're using show three results rather than show two, and we're using rejects to view some HTML. That is pretty much it as far as kind of a useful way of using tokens and certainly hiding and showing different panels based on token state, and as well how you can throttle searches based on whether tokens are set or not, which is also quite handy to do. And if you've ever had a look at my app that I created called SPL Rehab, you will and had a look at how that works, you'll see that it does a lot of that, where we've got a lot of unset tokens in searches to kind of manage how that runs. Are there any questions so far?
That's real cool. I don't know about reject, so I'm not a question, but I wanted to share a use case. I've done the depends to show different columns in the table. So we've wanted to, and maybe there's a better way of doing it, but you know, different people want to see different columns. So I have just a radio button that's saying which view they want, and then showing different panels based on that, which is basically just loading off of the same base search and doing a list of fields.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that's quite cool with or a good workaround is the depends. You can only have one depends condition. You can't have multiple. So if you happen to want to set to display a view based on multiple tokens, then you can't do that on a single depends. So I couldn't have this row as depends show color, show 3 row, and then another depends show 3 results. They have to be on separate separate blocks. However, what you can do is you can have your row on a depends flag if you want to make sure that you don't show that row unless that token exists. And then you can have your panel set to another one. And if you've just got one panel in your row, then that's a way of creating 2 depends conditions for a block without hitting that limitation. The other one is making use of rejects. You can have a depends and a rejects on the same block. So you can almost use negative ways of getting it by having a depends and a rejects on the same line. It gets quite complicated at that point, but it's certainly something you can do.
I think what we ended up doing is just when they select an option, set it and set some tokens based on which they want to see. So I think we just had 3 different tokens and would set all of them. So yeah, very cool.
So I think the next one might be quite useful is hidden text inputs. Now, this is where we start actually having a look at the data in my house. So our lovely screen here, we've got a category, and what we're going to do first is have a look at a few different elements. So I'll show you how this dashboard works, and then I'll show you how it works under the hood. So first of all, if I go, and I'm interested in some batteries within my house, and particularly my phone, because I'm terrible at making sure it stays on charge. And we can see the battery for my phone over the last 24 hours. The last time it was at 100%, seems as though it was around 5 o'clock yesterday evening. And because I'm good, I did not charge it overnight. Usually I wake up in the morning and I'm full of regret for not charging it, but because we work from home, charger. But when you're commuting, that's not good. If you're like me and actually rely on your phone whilst on public transport anyway. But get down to 18%, I charged it, and now it's around 91%, which is good. If I have a look at one of the motion sensors, so have a look in the hallway at the motion sensor battery level there, we can see that that's been pretty flat all the way through. And now if I want to have a look at some lights, so just change this value here, and we can see that this panel changed, but also the drop down has changed. The chart has vanished. It's no longer there. And my 4-year-old I mentioned previously, I want to have a look at what his light was like at night. You know, is it working as it should? It should be on all throughout the night, and it should be at a fairly low level. And we can have a look here, and we can see that it was. He went to bed around 6:30, and it stayed at a low level throughout the whole night until he woke up at around 7 o'clock. So we can see, yeah, that worked exactly as it should. We're quite happy as far as that goes. If I go over to some motion sensors and just double check his room, and I can see he's quite a restless sleeper. And apart from at 9:30, motion was detected throughout the entirety of the night, which is what I would expect, really. It's quite a sensitive sense. It's triggered quite easily, and so it's detected motion throughout his room in the night, which is good. If I go to temperature, you can see that this dashboard is basically resetting itself each time. I guess actually before I do that, I can go back to motion sensors. We can see that that chart it will not reload. Something that people tend to do, can set for different panel, different flows as you go through, and won't reset kind of like sub tokens. So as you go back to, say, if I'd have gone to motion sensors, temperature, and then back to motion sensors, some people would have that chart display again because it's not been reset, because usually it's a bit of a pain to have to deal with all that kind of logic, especially as you add more and more things into a dashboard as you go further on. If I just check some temperatures, go into my study right now, I can see it's quite a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius. So I should know what I should have converted that to Fahrenheit for this, but I didn't. But 20 degrees Celsius is quite nice. It's quite a it's quite a comfortable temperature for me, so I'm happy with that and can see that's all good. Now, behind the scenes, in order to one thing I could do is whenever I change this, I could set and unset a load of different values. That's one way of doing it. If I all of a sudden want to change that logic, though, if I want to add a different element in entirely, I have to take all those set and unset tokens and replicate it. And as the dashboard gets bigger and bigger, it becomes more difficult to go and do that. So a really fun workaround, and there's the possibilities are kind of endless with this, is to use text inputs. So we can see actually what the dashboard looks like behind the scenes. And even though we have 4 different categories showing 4 different tables, we're showing the same table. However, we've only got 3 different charts. So one of these drop downs is actually ultimately reusing this one of these charts again. And this is all kind of driven by 2 hidden inputs. So we've got an input that is responsible for hiding, basically unsetting everything. And we've got one that's got some conditional logic baked in that goes, okay, well, if you selected this, then this is what I want to do. And so if I go through the XML, this kind of helps a little bit more. We've got our drop down at the top here, and we can see the battery, the lights, the motion, the temperature, and the actual values for those is pretty much the whole search as it was. And we've got this change event. So whenever the value of this token changes, then we want to do something. So if the value is that, then we know it's the battery that's been chosen. There's probably a better way to do this. But in essence, we're just identifying when we selected battery, lights, motion, and temperature. And we're actually telling that hide view input, text input, that's the value that we want to set it to. Batteries, lights, motion, and temperature. So if I go all the way to the bottom, we've got this row here, and it's on a depends flag, but it's on a token called never show. Now, you could give it whatever you want, but in essence, I just kind of try and keep it something like never show as a token that I would never ever create, and therefore it will never display or never show to the end user that this row exists. And in here we've got our panel, and we've got 2 inputs. We've got our first, which is hide view, as the token is hide view and it's text. And the first thing to bear in mind when we're setting them is that we're actually setting form dot token, not just the token. This goes and changes the actual value of the input, not the token under the hood. And that will then go and execute this change event. We have it set to default just because it makes sure that it will always run regardless of what happens. Sometimes just kind of a good catch-all to be able to do that. And then we've got our unsets. So we unset this time chart of range, this token of time chart range, this one of time chart min, time chart light, selected entity. And then we set as final our form.showView token, which is the value of the second input token. And we're setting it to the value of this token. So dollar value dollar. This goes into the next text input, and this has conditional logic. The reason that you can't do both is you can't have a blanket set of unsets or sets and then have conditions within. It's an either or kind of deal. You can either have conditions or you can have the set and unset. And it's kind of easier and a little bit tidier to do it this way as well. So we the value of this has changed. And then based on the conditions, so we've got battery, temperature, motion, and lights. And this will eventually ultimately set time chart min, time chart range, and time chart light. So it allows us to reuse the same chart for temperature and motion and keep separate ones for battery and lights. But if I want to add anything later on, I want to change something, I don't have to go and edit. I don't have to basically have a bunch of unsets, which is what you would typically see, and one set. My macro, there you go. Which is what you would tend to see, not within a change event, but usually within drill down or something like that. Having it this way means you can really use all that logic again. Now, the other good thing, and you can see this in action actually, if I go to here, select battery, we can see the hashed the hashes around these charts showing that they would actually be hidden. We can see the hashes around this box, this panel as well, showing it would be hidden. And if I type in temp, that goes and changes this one straight away to temp. And because I haven't changed the drop down here, this will stay as it is because there's nothing that says this needs to set. So it won't rerun the query. However, you could bolt it all together and go whenever that changes, change the, change the value back to whatever it should be on here, just as a belt and braces thing. And that can be quite useful. Certainly one use case where I've gone and done that is when I've been working with Splunk Cloud in quite a restricted environment, and I want to have a selectable button. You can kind of make use of hidden inputs doing that by having this kind of logic here and having a linked list button with one option. When that's clicked, that will then go and run this set and unset these tokens, which basically act exactly the same as if you have clicked on a button with a little bit of JS behind the scenes to set and unset some tokens. Kind of a fun little use case. It's a pain to set up, but once it's set up, it's easy. Something I tend not to try and do. But you could also make use of this functionality for adding radio buttons, but in a landscape kind of setting rather than vertical, which is what's there by default. Again, can be quite complex doing that, but it's something I've done in the past. One of my other favorites though is just having a hidden text input to handle a token that's been set as you enter the dashboard. I think if we go in this one here, I edit it, we can see that I've actually got the same thing going on here. And that's how I tend to prefer to pass tokens from one dashboard to the next. When I select this, it goes and sets this form presentation name, which is the hidden text input that you don't see, to drive that. So something that is universal really in its amount of applications. The only downside from my own experience is that you can see the actual value within the URL. So if you want to try and hide it or anything like that, then you kind of can't use this. But if you aren't bothered about showing whatever the value is, then you can do this. And it also makes it quite easy if someone tells you that their dashboard's not working for some reason. If you're basically handling all your tokens in text inputs, then when they copy the URL and pass it over to you to have a look and see what's going on, then you've already got the values of their tokens. If it's a particularly complex dashboard, you know exactly what's going on because you've got all their tokens already set. Kind of a handy thing as well. Any questions there?
So just to kind of,
yeah.
Oh, was there another question?
No, I think that was me saying nope, but
Okay.
you beat me to it.
So to summarize, basically, instead of just setting a token, if you set form.token, then it will trigger the change and let you do a lot of other stuff off of that.
Yes, yeah, because normally if you just
Nice.
normally if you set a token, there's nothing within a token. There's no facility available within a token to say, well, if it's been set to this, then actually I want to do this as well. If it's been set to this, then I want to do this as well. Whereas if you set an input, then you have that change event that you can then go and do that kind of conditional logic.
Nice. Cool.
So that's that one. We go over to some CSS now. Now I have, like I mentioned, I've got a Home Assistant installation. This also has Node-RED, and at the moment behind my computer screen, I've got a smart light strip which is changing color every 10 seconds. The reason I'm telling you this is because it helps give you an idea as to exactly what's happening here. So the background color is changing every 10 seconds based on what the background color of my light is transitioning to. So, and it's kind of just a bit of a fun way of just handling a bit of CSS, and gives you an idea as to the fact that you don't need to reload a dashboard to if there's something with CSS that you need to change. One use case certainly for this, you will have seen it if you went onto the virtualracer.conf and saw the dashboards that we put together. Each race was customized based on the race sponsor. So the dashboard behind the scenes was exactly the same, but we were using CSS to handle all those colors to make them fit the sponsor's branding. And this is basically doing exactly the same thing. So we've got a few things happening that I can cover. One is CSS and how that's handling here and how that works. We've also got a base search running, and we've also got custom colors for the bar charts here as well. So if I show you the XML, and it also will then mean that you don't see the colors as much. So we've got a base search, which I'll come back to, but in essence, it's no different from any other search. This is just driving the bar chart. But the one that we want to cover as far as CSS goes is this single panel, this one here. So this one has got a refresh set, and you can set this in the UI of every 10 seconds. We'll go and run the query to get the current color for the light behind my screen. And it's going to go and set, where is it? Oh, the RGB color right there. So it's going to actually set the value of the RGB color field to RGB, open brackets, then the actual value of the RGB values is sent through from Home Assistant, and then close it. And that will then go and make sure that that's a valid CSS RGB value. And then we're basically just setting our description, our color, which is just this bit within here, so just the numbers and the RGB color itself. And on the done state here, we are setting result.rgb color to be just this token here of BG color. And if we go underneath, we can see just a little bit of CSS. So we've got our row also using depends of never show. Here we've got a HTML with a style block, and we've got the dashboard body set to the background color of the BG color token. And because we're messing around with Splunk's layouts, we have to put the flag of exclamation mark important just to force it to make sure that it uses that value rather than anything else of precedence. And we're also, for no real reason, because it probably impedes the the readability or can do, we're also doing exactly the same with the single value. So rather than color or background color or anything like that, when we're changing the color of a single value, we need to use the fill object. And again, we can use the token. And I think we also need to use important here. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Best practice is not to unless you really need to. But that is how that's working. Because the values are changing by the token, it's doing it without having to refresh anything on the dashboard. It's just whenever the search is executed. Now, for those that haven't used base searches before, this is kind of a really useful way of being able to run one search to get your results for most of your dashboard, and then just display slightly different things based off that main search in many different panels, rather than every single panel being a separate full-blown Splunk search, which can be quite expensive. In essence, it looks absolutely no different from a normal search. We can see in the single value, we've got search, we can ignore done. It's really query. We've got our earliest and latest. We can have refresh and things like that if we want to, but in essence, a base search needs to be nothing more than a search block, a query block, earliest and latest. The difference being that we have to have in our search an ID. So in this case, we're setting our ID to main base. This runs this search. We don't see it, but we can then reference it. So here we've got our search block, and here rather than ID, we have base equals, and then main underscore base, and we've got our query here. And this, the UI sometimes has a bit of an issue with, because it goes, oh, actually, if you don't want to do anything with your base search, you just want to display your base search, you in essence don't need a query, but the UI doesn't like the fact that you have a search with no query, and the UI, you're not able to reference a base search. You have to go into the XML. But in essence, it's just these two things here on top of this search, which makes the full search that you see for this time chart down the bottom here. And if you have a base search that is referenced over multiple different panels, hitting the refresh button here will refresh all your panels, because all your panels are driven off the main panel. But once you get the hang of it, it's quite a really useful way to put some dashboards together. There are a couple of caveats. Ideally, you need a transforming search. By that, I mean you need to be using something like time chart, stats, or chart, one of those kind of commands that's going to go and condense your result count. Reason being, I think you're limited to 1,000 results that come off your base search. Anything more than that, they will drop off, but Splunk won't tell you. If you have a search that has a small amount of data that you don't run a transforming command on, you can absolutely do that. However, in those instances, you need to at least use the fields command, fields or table right at the end, to specify the fields you're interested in. Otherwise, a base search will send nothing through to your panel. Your panel will not display anything, and then you'll spend ages wondering why on earth your search isn't working, because it should be. And then when you hit your expand search to open it up in the search screen, it does display results, which makes it even more confusing. And that's 9 times out of 10 the reason why. The other reason why you have a results discrepancy is because you've gone over that 1,000 result threshold, which is both things I've spent many times trying to work out why it's not working, and have then regretted life's choices. So it's just being mindful of that, really.
Yeah, there's a whole article from SideView from 2017 about the dangers of post-process searches. So I just dropped that into chat for anyone who wants to dig in.
Thank you. And the last thing as well on this one is pretty simple. It's just on the chart. We can see we've got this charting.series colors, and this allows us to customize each bar to a specific color. Problem here is it has to be a hex color. I tried it could be RGB, but I couldn't get RGB to work. So typically it's best if you use hex colors for this, and it's just an array such as this, which will allow you to customize each individual element within the series. Quite useful to be able to do that, and yeah, it's something I tend to prefer to do if I need to hold a color state in here, because we're showing literally the average values of red, green, and blue for a particular time period. It makes sense to have the columns as red, green, and blue, but a little bit softer, because if you have the full red, green, and blue with a dark theme, then your eyes will hurt. Any other questions for now?
I had one. Awesome. If anybody else has. My question was with see, which one did you do that with? With a single, where you set the style of the single. Can you use IDs to, if you have multiple of those? So if you specify an ID, it will carry through to CSS.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have single and then an ID on there, then yeah, you can absolutely just control the ID for that. The only thing that's annoying with ID is that you cannot have multiple blocks with the same ID on a Splunk, on like a Splunk component. So you would, if you have say like 5 or 6 separate single values that you want to share across, share the same colors for, and keep everything else different, then you have to have 5 or 6 separate IDs and then reference each of those individually within CSS, which quickly becomes quite a pain.
I haven't touched CSS in years, but I think you can do like wildcard selects.
Yeah.
For cases like that. But okay, no, it's good to know that it respects the IDs and gets them through.
Yeah, the only thing, the place where that doesn't apply is HTML blocks. If you're messing around within HTML blocks, so not the primary HTML block, but ones underneath, so div, table, all those kind of ones, you can assign the same ID to those individual subblocks, which again is quite handy if you're messing around with a lot of HTML. Then you can certainly go and do that. Quite useful to be able to change values with and use HTML to have different like header panel titles and headers and that kind of thing, because with the Splunk you're usually tied to the title block within a chart or the title block of a panel, and I don't have much of an issue with the title block for a chart, but I really don't like that the title block for a panel is not bold and is just slightly larger text. I'm personally not a fan of it. In those cases where I have to have a bit more description, then I'll use a HTML block.
Well, IDs theoretically are supposed to be unique, but can you use class? Have you tried that?
You can't use, so this is a while ago I tried using class and gave up because it wouldn't work. You couldn't, from memory, you couldn't do it with the Splunk objects. So like the row, the panel, the single, but again, because of how the HTML blocks worked, I could have done it within HTML blocks.
Okay,
cool. So as we go from there onto embedding, now something that a few people have asked in the past is, when we've done a dashboard, can we make it publicly available on a website? The answer to that is usually no. But there is one feature which has some people that like it, some people that don't, and it's within a saved search. You can have there's an option to embed, so you can create a saved search and then select an option there to embed the search. That will allow you to that will create an iframe that you can then reference within a website and view your chart there. So this here is a safe search. It's motioned by each of the sensors that we've got in the house. So you can just have a trellis view across all of that. Now this is a safe search that's embedded. If I select on it, it'll open up the safe search, so you can just see that it looks exactly the same. Hit edit, and we can see the main problem that we have with embedding, and it's that if you want to change the search, you have to disable embedding in order to edit the report. Now, in some ways, having this locked is a good thing, because it does mean that no one can make any changes unless they really mean to. And certainly if you've got something that's publicly viewable, you don't want to be making changes every 5 minutes. However, when you do disable the embedding and re-enable, a different tokens attached. So then you've got to go back to the web team and you've got to get them to embed the new iframe because it's a different iframe than before. And depending on the change process and exactly what it is that you want to change, that can be a bit of a pain. So for instance, if I have a look here, I can see that I've got a sensor called upstairs rather than upstairs as it should be. And that's because my replace and Rex wasn't particularly great for that. But if I wanted to change that, I would have to go and edit, disable, and do that whole process that I just mentioned. However, there is a workaround in order to be able to do some of that, which is quite handy. So we can see here exactly what the search is doing. It's running a macro, and we've got our earliest and our latest. So behind here, it's going to be, yeah, there you go. Runs daily at midnight. The range is the last 24 hours, and these results were generated 18 hours ago. We can see that that's true. Minus 24 hours an hour. Latest is now. Schedule is midnight, and the actual search that's being run is just this macro of motion by sensor. And if I select this, I'll see what the value of the macro is. Just in case anyone was wondering, I'm using a few different REST commands to get all this information together. Again, I really recommend if you want to have a look at the set, your config and settings. Within, you've got different use cases where you would think that it'd be useful to use them. REST usually has your back with that, and definitely recommend having a look. That's a tangent. So for the macro, we can actually see it's the full search. And the advantage of doing this is that it means that I can edit this macro. I am not limited to having to disable the embedding of my search to edit the search and then re-embed it again. I can just edit the macro. The macro has no idea that it's been used in a safe search that's embedded. So I could do that change. You can see here the regex that's actually removing things like S's from the end. I think it's Archie's and Bradley's, but it's also got an effect of things like upstairs. So I could remove that if I wanted to, and then have and just save the macro. At that point, nothing changes. The search is still going to be as it is until the next time it runs. But the next time it runs, it's going to run the updated macro. It won't have any idea that the macro's changed. It's just going to run the code within the macro, and therefore you've updated your search without actually having to do anything else. It's quite useful. Not many use cases, I think, for embedding, but it's a feature that's useful to know. Also useful to know the limitations and the workaround if you need it. Within the macro as well, because you can't edit the time range for this report, but you can update the earliest and latest conditions within this particular macro. So you could say earliest is, I don't know, minus 12 hours and latest is now. And then it will only run the last 12 hours because, as you may know, earliest and latest in a search when specified takes precedence over the time picker. So again, these useful to know. Suspect that will probably not be valid if you do that, but I've not tested it. I could be wrong. Any questions with that?
Not a question, but again, a comment. My guess was going to be that you're going to have another scheduled job and use load job, but that I guess requires staggering them, which is a little more complicated. But I like this. This is nice.
What for in what?
So if you schedule another job and all that this job embedded job says is just load the job, then you can do whatever you want with it.
Correct. However, that is definitely one way of doing it. People that use search ad clusters with objects that are not shared between the cluster may have a difference of opinion on that, though. Load job
to have it on all different. Okay.
Yeah, load job creates a search artifact, and if the search artifacts aren't shared across the search ad cluster, then you won't necessarily be able to call that load job to run that safe search unless they were running off the same search ad. So it's just a limit. It's a limitation with load job and something to be aware of. It's really something I should try and fix as well in SBL Rehab, because that makes use of load job a lot. And I know it has various degrees of success within search head clusters. If only had a search head cluster to test it in. So on to the last one, version control. Now this is almost a direct result of the freedom that you get with being able to do this. Now you can do this with any knowledge object, not necessarily dashboards, but I'll show you how I use it for dashboards. So I basically have one safe search, and I call it dashboard version control. This runs REST, and it will call this endpoint data UI views. Now, this is, if anyone's spotted the URL at the top, this is the Splunk Cloud instance for the Splunk Trust. So I have my own app within here called Westy's World. Terrible name, there we go. And what I want to do is I just want to get the title, the actual data, and whether it is and when it was last updated. Do a bit of modifications with that, get the current date as now, run a lookup against a lookup that I've got called Westy dashboard version control, and output the XML as stored XML. And the reason I do this is that this actual REST API call is going to bring back a field of EAI data, and that is the actual XML for a dashboard, which is what you've seen me do in other dashboards I've shown. How I've shown you that XML without going into edit is just by running that same thing, but specifying the dashboard that I want. So this is going to get me all the dashboard, all the XML for all the dashboards that I have within my app. It's then going to compare the value of the XML field from REST versus what I've already stored in XML. And if I haven't stored it before, or if that value has changed, then I'm going to append that to my version control lookup. Now you could do that. It'd be much safer to do this in a KV store, for instance, and make sure that it's backed up. For my own personal environment, it's not something I'm going to go like around the houses doing, so I'm quite happy just storing it in a CSV. But in essence, it means that I've just got a CSV with all my XML dashboard XMLs, and whenever I've made a change, I've got that updated version. So if I make a change to something and it breaks, then I've already got the previous version. If I select this search here, it's going to show you just what values are within that CSV at the moment. So we've captured these particular dashboards that are in my app. We've only gone and updated each one once since this report was created. And if I go to, if we go to the tokens dashboard that we started this presentation on, we can see the XML is exactly the same, except this time we're using the XML stored within the lookup rather than the XML that was generated from the REST call, which is what we were doing when we were actually viewing the XML originally in that part of the presentation. But you can do, like I said, there's REST APIs there's one for your conf files. So in theory, you could back up all your conf files just by having a safe search, pulling in the details of your conf files, and then running storing that detail out to look up. The other thing as well, as far as REST goes, especially with that particular endpoint, is if you combine that with a untable command, then you could, as long as you use it against your main identifying field, which when you run untable, you've got 3 fields. The first field being the identifying field that things kind of get grouped by, and then you've got 2 that you basically, I will always call field and then value, because your field name is the next column along, and then your value is the value of that field. But in essence, you get an output that looks very, very similar to Beetle. So if anyone that's had a look at Beetle, anyone that wants to see almost what your config files look like within a Splunk search, that's kind of a fun way of being able to do it, and really useful, especially if you're on Splunk Cloud, because you don't have access to the backend system to see what values of your conf files are. So handy to be able to see that. The only thing you won't get is the debug, so which app that value is retrieved from. but you do get what the actual power, whatever that value is, which is quite useful. That is pretty much it. Is there any other questions?
Anybody else? Just a fair warning, my Zoom is flaking out and keeps going to not responding mode. So if I disappear, well, then I disappear.
In that case, I'm going to take this opportunity right now to say thank you very much for giving up your lunchtime or spending your lunchtime with me and for allowing me to show you these dashboarding tricks. I am on the Slack channels as Westy, so feel free to get in touch if there's any questions you want to get that you want to ask afterwards. I usually quite heavily monitor the dashboards channel within there as well, so if there's any questions, feel free to ask on there. If I'm not on there answering it, there's someone else that's equally helpful, if not probably more so, on there answering the question as well. Really great place to find out any hints, tips, tricks, and solutions to problems that you may or may not have with dashboards as well.
Very cool. Third time around was did not disappoint. This is excellent. You might be coming back again.
You know, it's always in one of my favorite groups. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm always happy to attend any point. If nothing else, because you actually having a fairly sociable time. It's still daylight in the UK, which is the fact that we have daylight at all is astounding. But at the moment, is especially amazing. I think his Zoom's died. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Okay, maybe some of that come through. My Zoom froze completely.
Yeah, I kind of guessed it was, so I said thanks to everyone.
Really weird. Yeah. All right, you jump in on the Boston Slack channel if you're not in there already, because that's where we talk about the next topic. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you. And I can't end the meeting because my Zoom is frozen. There we go. Nope. 5-second wait for each button click. Awesome. I might have to leave this part in the recording. I'm trapped in Zoom forever. Please send help. What are you doing, Zoom? Oh, wait. Can I leave now? No. Come on. End meeting. No. Oh, sure.